Hello friends, and it's Funky Play Brothers, and please remember to subscribe to our YouTube. And today I'm reading Five Nights at Freddy's Tales from the Pizzaplex 8, Book 8, B7-2, Part 7, and this is by Scott Cawthon, Adrian Wagger, and Kelly Para. Last time we left off, Billy heard suspicious ringing coming from his grandma's rotary phone. The following week passed the same way the first one had. Billy found that the simple, quiet days suited him more than he thought they would. On some levels, he was aware that the life he was living now wasn't typical for a guy his age, but he didn't care. He didn't think he'd want to live in the country forever. But for now, it was just what he needed. It was giving him time to figure out what he wanted to do. The daily routine was soothing, except for those few seconds at the end of the days. As he was settling into bed, the ringing phone had bothered him more each time he heard it. Why am I concerned about it? He wondered. Was it the regularity for this calls? Was it the fact that his grandma never mentioned them? But then, why would she? She wasn't obliged to tell him about everything she was doing. The second Sunday that Billy and his grandma went to church, Frank took Billy fishing afterwards. Billy learned that fishing was kind of boring, but he did like sitting in a floating chair next to a river, shooting the breeze with Frank. Billy had been a little nervous about spending time with someone he didn't know. What would he say? But Frank was easy to talk to, an author who wrote private eye novels. Frank was really interested and intelligent. He talked about his work in a way that made him sound like it was a lot of fun to make up characters and stories. So much so that by the time they were done fishing, Billy had decided maybe he'd like to be an author. When Billy had been growing up, he hadn't thought about what he was going to do as an adult. He was a robot. That was all there was to what he was going to do. Since he started his new post, B7 Life, trying to imagine what he'd do for the rest of his days, had been way too much to contemplate. The time with Frank, however, showed Billy a future that he thought he might really enjoy. With 2 limbs missing, Billy knew his options were a little limited, but he could write. What should I do if I want to be a writer? Billy asked Frank as they gathered up their fishing gear and walked away from the river. Right, Frank said. He gawked, but then he sobered. Seriously, kid, he said. It's a clinch, but writers write. If you want to get good at it, any craft, you have to practice. So just start writing. When they got back to Frank's old red SUV, Frank dug around in the back seat and pulled out a plain line notebook. I use these. I have cases of them. Frank handed the notebook to Billy. Billy took it and ran his hand over the smooth cover. Start keeping a journal. Write whatever comes to your mind, Frank said. And Billy did. Writing became as much of his routine as spending time with his grandma. His days became happily predictable, with 2 exceptions. The first exception was a good day. Every passing day, things got better and better between Billy and his grandma. Billy even discovered that his grandma had a fun side. The day after Billy went to church for the first time, his grandma asked him to help her in her flower garden. Still not a fan of flowers and still struggling to get around on one leg, Billy wasn't real keen on the idea, but he decided that dutiful grandson helped with their grandmas in the garden, so he went along with it. Luckily, his grandma had little stools for them to sit on while they worked. I don't get up and down so easily anymore either, she said when she brought out folding stools that had sturdy metal handles to help with getting up and down. I've been using one of these for years. She said, "I brought a second one for you." Billy was touched by her thoughtfulness. "Thank you," he said. He sat down and learned how to pull weeds and deadhead the flowers. They worked in silence for a bit, and then his grandma asked, "What do you call it when the flower goes on a date with another flower?" Confused, Billy stopped working and looked at his grandma. "A budding romance," she said, and then she laughed. Her gravelly laugh. Billy laughed too. He hadn't known his grandma could tell a joke. "What do you call flowers who are close friends?" he asked his grandma. She raised an eyebrow at him. Her unusually cringed, tight mouth stretched out into a smile. "What?" she asked. Billy had a feeling she knew what he was going to say. She let him say it. "Buds," he said. They laughed together. After that, Billy started liking flowers. The second exception to the pleasurable routine of Billy's passing days was his incredible, distinct regarding to the mysterious nightly phone calls. It rang at precisely 9:03. The phone never rang more than twice. Usually the second ring was cut off. Tonight Billy was getting ready for bed a little later than usual at 9:03. When the phone rang, he was just leaving the bathroom. When the ring cut off, Billy paused and listened for the first time. He heard his grandma speaking to whoever he called. Billy took a couple quiet steps toward his grandma's bedroom door. He could only just barely hear his grandma's voice. She wasn't talking in her normal tone. She spoke in a whisper that told Billy she didn't want him to hear the conversation. So Billy returned to his room. The next morning, when he woke, Billy thought about what he'd heard the night before. Already on edge about the phone calls, Billy found that his grandma's hushed tone added to his unease. He tried to tell himself that a regular phone call wasn't a big deal, but he thought it was strange that the call came at exactly the same time each night. It was strange enough that Billy really wanted to know who his grandma was talking to. Accordingly, Billy decided he would time his pre-bed routine so he'd be in the hall again at the same time of the call. This time he tried harder to listen. He tried, but he couldn't make out her whispers. Each failed attempt at eavesdropping raised Billy's anxiety. Who was calling? Why 9:03? And why the whispering? What didn't Billy's grandma want him to hear? Billy wrote in his journal about these questions, but he didn't reach any conclusions. For over a week, even as he wrote about them, Billy told himself that the calls were none of his business. He should just ignore them. One night, though, his curiosity made him a little bolder when he listened by his grandma's door. Instead of just standing by the door, Billy put the side of his head to the paneled wood, shifting his beanie so his ear canal was open to receiving as much as possible. Billy listened hard. His grandma's whispered words were still too muted to hear. She was definitely talking to someone, because there were pauses in the whispering, as if she was listening to whoever was on the other end of the line. Even though Billy knew it would have been wrong, he wished his grandma had a second phone in the house, so he could have picked up another receiver and listened. It's something about the calls per seal specific timing, and his grandma's whispers were making him uneasy. These weren't normal, just called the chat phone calls. Something was going on. Billy was becoming sure of it, but what could he do about it? Over the next couple weeks, Billy got stronger and stronger. The residual pain from his surgeries had all but disappeared, and he learned to do pretty much everything that he needed to do to take care of himself. He also was starting to get a sense of himself. He felt like he was ready to be on his own. Billy had surprisingly enjoyed the time with his grandma, but all the writing he was doing made him realize that if he was going to become an author, he needed to broaden his horizon. He needed some life experiences beyond just living in a country cottage. even beyond living in his own town. Billy was so eager to get out into the world and explore. He even started looking into getting a new prosthetics. AI who'd been coming out to visit Billy once a week had brought him the information he needed to make a decision, and Billy made an arrangement to go for it. On a chilly Thursday evening, after sharing a dinner of beef stew and cornbread with his grandma, Billy decided it would be his last night with her. He didn't tell her that. He wouldn't tell her in the morning. Billy didn't think she'd be upset, even though they were getting along great. His grandma seemed like she was becoming tired, as if maybe his presence in her home was starting to wear on her. She was moving more slowly, and she was paler than she'd been when she'd brought him home. His grandma went to her room early that night. That was fine. Billy wanted to do some writing anyway. For an hour or so, Billy wrote in his journal. By then, he was on his third notebook. Frank had brought a stack of them to the church a week after they went fishing. Just before 9, Billy got up to step out into the hall. He was still determined to try to figure out what the 903 phone calls were about. So he made sure he was near his grandma's bedroom door by 9:02. Billy waited in the hall for a minute. When the phone didn't ring, he checked his watch. It was 9:03. He still waited. 9:04. The phone didn't ring. Billy frowned at his watch and looked at his grandma's door. That's when he realized that he could hear her talking, not whispering, actually talking. Who was she talking to? Grandma, Billy called out softly. His grandma didn't respond. She just kept talking without thinking. Billy reached out and grasped his grandma's door handle. He turned it and pushed the door open, realizing he was being impolite but not caring. Billy stepped into his grandma's bedroom. Billy hadn't been sure of what he thought. He'd seen when he intruded into his grandma's space. His grandma talking on the phone, a secret romantic caller, something else. Whatever that something else might have been, Billy never would have guessed it would be what he saw when he looked toward his grandma's bed. If he'd guessed, he never would have opened the door. Simultaneously, Billy's breath stopped and his heart rate tripled. For several long seconds, he couldn't even move enough to inhale or exhale as he listened to his pulse pound in his ears. All Billy could do was stare at his grandma, which meant that he was also staring at the thing that had come into the hospital room and terrorized him with its exhortations to let it back in. Billy's body demanded that he take a breath. He opened his mouth and spasmodically gulped in air. The sound he made was loud in the room, but neither his grandma nor the horrible thing creeping over her noticed the noise. A coordination into a pleated mass of metal and plastic. Pleated mass of metal and plastic. The thing still stained with Billy's blood and encrusted with a now drying bits of Billy's tissue, was itching its way up Billy's grandma's prone body. Every move it made emitted in the clicks and squelches that Billy recognized from that night in the hospital room. His grandma, dressed in her usual combo of flora blouse and polster pants, today's in pink and purples, had made no attempt to get away from the hideousness that was attempting to fuse itself with her. In fact, she was encouraging it. That's where we'll leave off for today. Next time, we'll find out if Billy's grandma was betraying Billy and trying to get the B7 back into Billy for the next part, the final part. So, friends, thanks for listening. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Follow us on Twitter at the Funky Play Bros. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the Funky Play Brothers. Support our vlog at cashapp at the $ Funky Play Brothers so we can have more unboxings, more taste tests, more adventures, more monies, and for support. Thank you for watching. Bye!